morning, good afternoon, good evening. There is nothing predetermined about Zimbabwe being poor. In 1980, when the country gained its independence, Zimbabwe's GDP per capita was 3 times what it is today. In other words, in the last 45 years, the country's wealth has steadily dropped, making us poor. One of the clear indications of where the country was going was the failure to govern ourselves. The democracy index. Zimbabwe was caught up in a situation where instead of respecting the freedom and human rights of all Zimbabweans, those in the positions of power and authority have sought to dominate. It's almost the default setting. That primeval force of wanting to dominate, survival of the fittest, dominate or be dominated. As a people, we have failed to rise above that. The futility of that mentality of dominating, of always seeking to dominate others, is that it is a battle you never win. Because even if you do manage to dominate, you're always looking behind you for those who are trying to dominate you in turn, and they're always looking in front of you for more people to dominate. So it's an endless cycle. And one day, somebody will get the better of you and they will dominate you. And it is their turn. And so it goes on. The good governance or the democracy index has always reflected also the country's economic well-being, not just in Africa, the world over. So if you look at our region, countries like South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia, they've had a very good post-independent good governance issue. And their economic wealth has also remained healthy. Whereas Zimbabwe, we were on par with South Africa when we gained our independence in 1980. Today, South Africa's per capita GDP is 3 times that of Zimbabwe. Botswana, the same thing. Namibia is not doing too badly. And so on. how did we get here? Well, we failed to have leaders who believed that they do not have the divine right to rule. That is at the heart of it. Here is somebody who has done a study and mentioned some of the things that have made some countries poor while others have remained, some countries rich while others have remained poor.
world. 25 of them are very rich, defined as having an average wealth per person of over $100,000 a year. They are. But far more countries are quite poor, and some, which we're considering here, are very, very poor. These are the 20 poorest countries in the world, where the per capita wealth is under $1,000 a year, or under $3 a day. Every country is now more or less on a path to growth, but the poor ones are growing very, very slowly. If Zimbabwe continues at its current growth rate, it will qualify as a rich country in 2,722 years. What we want to know in this film is why some countries prosper and others stagnate, so that we can understand what rich countries are doing right and get a better grip on the challenges and hurdles facing poor countries. There are basically three factors that determine whether a country will be rich or poor. The first is institutions. Institutions are beyond important. Broadly speaking, rich countries have good institutions and poor ones have very, very bad ones. The correlation between poverty and corruption is direct. The richest countries in the world are quite simply invariably also the least corrupt ones. And the most corrupt countries are also the poorest. When countries are corrupt, they can't collect enough taxes to get the good institutions they would need to escape the poverty trap. Half of the wealth of the world's poorest 20 countries goes into offshore accounts. Lost revenues in these countries totals between $10 and $20 billion a year. Meanwhile, without an adequate tax base, poor countries can't invest in police, education, health, and transport. Now, a more generous way to look at corruption is that it's really a case of clan-based thinking. Say you're hiring someone. In the rich countries, you're meant to do so simply on merit, interviewing lots of candidates, then picking the best one, irrespective of any personal connection. But in poor countries, under the sway of clan-based thinking, that approach would itself be seen as corrupt. It's your duty to disregard the so-called best candidate from an anonymous bunch in order to pick someone from your own team, your uncle, your brother, your second cousin, the guys from the same tribe. As a result, poor countries don't allow themselves access to the intelligence and talent of the whole population. There's a second thing that keeps countries poor: culture. What goes on in people's minds, their outlooks and beliefs. A striking statistic pops up here in relation to religion. If there's one generalization you can make about religion and wealth, it's that the less people believe, the richer they stand a chance of being. 19 of the richest countries in the world have 70% or more of their populations saying that religion is not at all important to them.
Well, we could go through all the other things, but I think what matters most here is the realization that our problem is our own making. Zimbabwe does not have to be where we are today if we applied ourselves. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. Take the first instance there, the institutions. We all know and we all acknowledge that ZANU-PF has corrupted literally all our institutions. They are all departments of ZANU-PF in all but name. Be the judiciary, the ZEC, the police, the army, and even the opposition. ZANU-PF's influence in the country's its systems has become so corrosive that it is self-saving. The number one thing that is supposed to be saved in Zimbabwe is ZANU-PF. The good of the party has become more important than the nation itself. In the Roman Empire days, they drew two distinct divisions. What is good for Rome and what is good for Caesar. And they made it very clear that the glory of Caesar should never, ever trump the good of Rome. Indeed, historians will tell you that the Roman Empire collapsed when the glory of Caesar was more important than the good of Rome. And yet in Zimbabwe, the glory of Mnangagwa has become so important now. Everything is for ED. The other day I was watching a video of war veterans speaking. And it was being addressed by Douglas Mahia. You could not help but notice that the most important thing in that gathering was Mnangagwa. As with the idea of 2030. Mnangagwa has spent so much money in promoting himself and his selfish interest that seems to be the most important thing now to the nation. It doesn't make any sense. Surely the nation should have greater priorities than Mnangagwa, selfish drive for power. And yet, that's what we have. Mahia and company were all chanting 2030 Mnangagwa Nengachipo. This is the kind of brainwashing that happened before independence during Pungwe days, where the people were brainwashed into believing that ZANU-PF was the only salvation for the country. And the regime's intolerance to any other view was such that people feared during that time. The one thing they feared above everything else was being labeled Mtenges. If you betrayed the revolution, and in this case, it was betraying ZANU-PF, then you'll be killed. It was that simple. And one could not help but feel that Douglas Mahia and company, war veterans themselves, who were behind the Pungwe days, were now being subjected to the same level of intimidation. Even if any of them objected to this Mnangagwa staying on until 2030. They did not dare say it. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. We know the country has taken the wrong turn, but few even dare to admit it. The tragedy is until the people stand up and deal with these problems, the country is doomed. Because nobody is going to save the country. We need to save ourselves. At the present moment, we're doing precious little to save ourselves. And that's the reason why we are in this mess. I believe Zimbabwe could do a lot better. Indeed, we could have prevented the economic decline in 1980 if the people had asserted themselves and their rise to a meaningful say in the governance of the country, and not allow ZANU-PF a free hand to do as it damn well pleased, and which they've done by imposing the de facto one-party state. We can still reclaim Zimbabwe. We don't have to stay where we are now. We can still reclaim our position as a free people by reasserting our rights. Mnangagwa rigged 2023 elections. Both SADC and the AU election observers have condemned those elections as flawed and illegal. And per se, Mnangagwa is illegitimate. And so this whole idea of him now not only staying until 2028, but wishing to extend his rule, he is already illegitimate. And yet he wants to extend his rule beyond the 2028, which the term limit imposes on him. And are we going to allow him to do that? Because that is what we have done so far. The last 45 years of ZANU-PF, gross mismanagement, rampant corruption, and tyrannical rule was our own making. We know ZANU-PF was rigging the elections. And we have allowed the regime to rig the elections and to stay in power. We need to put an end to it. Everyone has a right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. It is more than a right. It is the very essence of good governance. And this is the one thing that Zimbabwe has been dying for decades: good governance. If we want good governance, we have to earn it. We have to stop the ZANU-PF dictatorship. It is within our power to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. Think about it. Thank you and have a good evening.